This week's episode is brought to you by Heartwarming Moment, Nicholas Meyer, Christy Howard, John Ratliff, and Dave Baxter. Thank you, Heartwarming Moment, Nicholas Meyer, Christy Howard, John Ratliff, and Dave Baxter. It's with the generous support of listeners just like you that helps keep our intrepid squad of Tartarian time-traveling secret agents equipped with wirelessly charge-free energy machines capable of disrupting the space-time matrix, enough for our team to evade the ever-watchful eye of the Grand Archons and their dang-stalking lackeys from intercepting this show and keeping you on the receiving end of our encoded instructions for top-secret missions of subterfuge against the Black Iron Prison. If you'd like to sabotage the Black Iron Prison, or just hear the second half of this episode, then please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your monthly donation of just $5 will not only get you instantaneous access to the extended version of this show, but our entire library of extended shows going all the way back before the shadow vampires began hiding under your bed. But that's not all. I'll send you at no additional cost a 5x5 high-quality vinyl sticker of our big Baphomet bunny cover art, and the secret keys to our Discord server where we discuss the secret recipe of freedom poutine. If you'd rather spend your $5 on a down payment of cat food, but still enjoy the show, then please consider giving us a like, subscribe, or share on your social media platform of choice, telling a friend, or even giving us a good review. What might seem like a small or insignificant gesture, these are the exact actions needed to eventually elevate us into an era where we can spend even more time working on the show. In this week's slightly unusual episode, we continue our tradition of refusing to take a week off for the holidays and just let the research fly off the rails to land wherever it wants. Midway through our perilous flight, Malachor 5 activated the parachutes he snuck on board, and the crew floated down into a discussion about the 1893 Chicago's World Fair, which, although obscure, is sometimes considered by historians to be as significant to the trajectory of American evolution as the Civil War, or, in other cases, even considered by some conspiracy theorists to be a thread which unravels the live mainstream historical timelines entirely. In the first half of the show, we discuss the history of the World's Fair, the unlikely, even miraculous series of events which led to Chicago hosting it in 1893, and travel back in time to explore the bizarrely enchanting or even sometimes grotesque happenings surrounding the big party. There's even a moment or two where we question if it happened at all. In the extended episode, we jump down the rabbit hole to explore the occult symbolism utilized by its organizers and dissect what it has to do with the esoteric legacy of the United States itself. Either way, there's a little bit of something for everybody, so thank you and enjoy the show.
Why are Ferris wheels made mostly of steel?
Why?
Because if they were aluminum, they'd be non-Ferris wheels.
Yeah.
Why should you never have sex on a carnival ride?
Why?
Because it's the carny's job to make sure you don't get off. What's the fastest ride at the carnival?
What?
Well, you'd think it'd be the roller coaster, but actually the carousel has more horsepower.
Oh, why did the Scarecrow win the blue ribbon at the fair?
Why?
Because he was outstanding in his field?
That's a good one.
Why did the tomato turn red at the county fair?
Why?
Because it saw the salad dressing. Hello everybody, and welcome to The Whole Rabbit, where we don't just tell you about the soul-stealing, blood-drinking, mind-possessing memes lurking in the dark corners of the internet. Nay, we explore the festival of memes from the turn of the century, which helped give birth to the American dream as we know it today, and established the United States as a global phenomena on the world stage. If in fact it really did happen at all, because this week we're discussing the little-known yet totally unrivaled turn-of-the-century extravaganza that was the Chicago World's Columbian Exhibition, better yet known as the World's Fair of 1893, all with a tiny splash of mud flood for a pinch of conspiratorial flavor. I'm your host, Luke Madrid, also known as the Hack Rabbit. I am joined this week by our usual co-hosts, the magnetic muckraker, Mari Sama,
What's good, bunnies?
the maddened maker of mud floods, Malachor 5,
I'm a mud baby. I can't be stopped.
and the humorously hot herbalist, Hecka Astra.
Hello.
I see you're stroking your black pussy on your lap.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. I didn't know it was that kind of show.
Wait a minute. What?
name's Ziggy.
So, for this special holiday season episode, we thought at first, of course, we would do a free discuss because we're so crunched for time, wrapping presents, meeting family, and hiding under our desks. And it ended up becoming a bit of an episode about the Chicago World's Fair of 1893 because, as it turns out, it actually has quite a bit to do with the last two episodes we did. First about memes, and secondly about Nikola Tesla, who won the War of the Currents at this historic event, which went on to change the entire world. But as we will soon find out, this was not the only world-changing spectacle that occurred at this fair. In fact, the World's Fair might even be to blame for the world we live in today. So much so that some think it may even be a giant conspiracy.
Yeah, those are some really good points. Some of the stuff we're going to get into in the later section, we're going to be talking about why that matters, about why an event like these could change the future. It's all in reference to a very ancient meme. And I just want to tell the listeners, for one, I'm a little sick, so sorry if I sound a little annoying, and bear with me through this, but also that having access to the show notes for this one is going to be kind of cool, kind of needed to get a better idea of what exactly we're going to be talking about today, at least for a few sections. Nonetheless, we'll try to be as descriptive as possible. For me, I can't quite pinpoint the first time I was told about the World's Fair. It was a long time ago in my life when I first heard about it, and I always kind of kept it in the back of my mind. But upon watching and researching the 1990s TV show and movie Twin Peaks by David Lynch, I quickly noticed an interesting jade-colored Saturn lamp resting on a table inside of the red room, or the waiting room, you know, that iconic set with the zigzag floor the show is known for. The same jade-colored Saturn lamp also appears in Blade Runner in Deckard's room next to a bottle of what looks like a Johnny Walker from here.
And so this makes the World's Fair not just an important meme, but one that filmmakers would include in their works to reference a bigger idea, you could say. And so we're going to learn a little bit about what those ideas are and what they may mean in those contexts.
Yeah, and interesting note, in Blade Runner, the director Ridley Scott, he didn't use overhead lamps and lights to light up the scenes. The whole movie's very dark for this reason, so he deliberately chose a bunch of lamps to light up the scene's backgrounds and his characters. So this lamp was chosen.
And as we learned in our Tesla episode, lamps were seen as the dawn of the future at the World's Fair. It's where they were largely introduced to the public as a viable form of technology that everyone should have.
Right. And to just invoke Twin Peaks real quick, the scenes that take place in that iconic red room are some of the most important yet cryptic riddles fans have sought to unravel the meaning of for many years. So naturally, in my investigation of those scenes, I knew this Saturn lamp had to have an interesting backstory. The Saturn lamp is from the 1939 World's Fair that took place in New York. We would go into a bit more details about other World Fair expos throughout today's talk, but the 1939 fair was the first event that focused on the future. Some interesting basic outlines of what these fairs were trying to do. Each of the World's Fairs adopted slogans for each, and the 1939 one was Dawn of the New Day. It was an invitation to take the public to the world of the future. While I have to fight the urge to go on and talk about Twin Peaks for hours, today's topic is about the World's Fair, which is also known outside of the USA as the Universal Exposition, the World Expo, and other names in different languages. And that whole thing is an interesting rabbit hole on its own. Each and every single one of these events is. So I think it's worth it to take a closer look at a variety of curated special events that were enormous, what they represent as a whole, what symbols and motives accompany them, and as well as the litany of modern conspiracy theories that, at least for me, are some of the best tales you can find online. I should also note that because of the massive meme complex that the creators of these events built and used, the United States identity as a nation is so strong within the events that I'm compelled to talk a bit about some of the USA's symbols, their seals and emblems, maybe a little bit what they mean, then try to wrap all that talk into a nice bow to get some points across as to why these events are worthy of a closer look by the whole rabbit in the first place.
Yes, and we hope it serves as a good tangent to the larger discussion of stuff like Flat Earth, the Kingdom of Tartaria, the Mud Flood, and any other counterfactual conspiracy theories that exist out there today, because some people believe the World's Fair actually never happened, that it was a remnant of an ancient long long-lost empire, which was destroyed by a great reset, etc., etc. And also, for the people out there who like to discuss whether or not America is a Christian nation, or a Masonic nation, or a satanic global conspiracy, there's a little bit of something here for everyone.
Yep. So, question. Where did you, my fellow host, first hear or see anything about the World's Fair, if you can remember?
I mean, it always sounded like a big party, but the most I'd ever heard of the World's Fair was in relation how ice cream cones became a fixture of American culture. The story I had always heard is that some guy was out there serving ice cream at his ice cream booth when he suddenly ran out of cups. He turned to the Turkish waffle stand person next to him and was like, "Help! I need cups!" Turns out it was actually a Syrian concessionaire named Ernest A. Hamwi who suggested that the ice cream vendor use a curled up version of his waffle cookie as a cup, which turned out to be a gigantic hit. Although the French had already thought of putting pretty much every possible configuration of dessert food together by that point, the use of an ice cream cone specifically was part of a bigger presentation. And it was at the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904 that it became a commercial success. Turns out these fairs used to be a pretty big deal.
I didn't actually know about the World's Fairs. I don't know if that's just from being a huge hermit or if that being Canadian and living under a rock combined. I don't know. It seemed like a bit of an American thing. I could be wrong, but I pretty much learned about it in the Tesla episode.
Well, it turns out it's a global affair. Affairs.
You know, to talk about the conspiracies just for a second more, that's the strange thing. These events still happen. There was one in Vancouver in the late 90s or 2000. And Hecka, did you know about that?
That Science World?
It might be one of the remnant buildings, but there was one there and it wasn't as big as the ones we're going to be talking about today for sure.
I think I remember something about like an Expo 86 or something like that, but that's the year I was born, so.
Yeah, this kind of just speaks to the fact that there's something strange about it because a lot of people thought it was just like this really old thing that we did in the past and they still go on, but the United States has not been a part of it since about 2000. And like really the only US entity that is present at these places is McDonald's, which is perfect for the memes.
So we send our fast food clown. You get out there and you show the world how much nicotine we can put in French fries.
I'm sorry, I'm just looking into this, the one in Vancouver from 1986, and it said that construction started when Queen Elizabeth started a concrete mixer on the future site of the Canada Pavilion.
She actually built the whole thing herself.
It's crazy. It's crazy significant. Like that's the Queen doing manual labor. And we're going to talk about why England matters later, too. It's all this crazy meme. And to speak to the mysteriousness of like why we don't hear about it as like, you know, I'd like to call us all educated individuals here on the show. Like we don't think that they even happen anymore. That's a little bit mysterious. Okay. And then I'm trying to make this episode and write the intro and like, okay, let's break down the first one. Right off the bat, this topic threw a curveball, though. I honestly do not know how else to say it, but I tried to find out basic history of these events, starting with the very first expo. Upon Googling this, I found that different websites had different dates and or places recorded as the first expo.
Oh, man.
We're going to tell you the truth today, but it's just funny because this is why the internet's so silly and don't trust everything you hear or read, you know? And I know Wikipedia is an awful source, which is why I also cross-check things when I'm doing research in the first place, so that's just how I found out. But even on the wiki itself, in the hyperlinks on the pages, you click on those, and it just keeps contradicting itself. So if you go to the main page for the expos, it says that the first one was held in 1791 Prague in modern-day Czech Republic. If you check the wiki page for the Great Exhibition in London of 1851, it says at the top of that page that this London-based one was the first. Then if you look at Britannica.com, it says that the first one occurred in 1756 England.
What?
Kind of silly. So while all that is its own mystery, let's move on.
You just are reading the Epic of Gilgamesh and there it is?
Basically. I don't know what else to say.
That's where he found the red root.
So the first expos that were anywhere close to the beginning levels of, you know, size and ambition were created, at least in theory, to help the public come to understand the coming industrial age. In short, there was too much happening way too fast for people to handle. I'm sure a lot of people were assuming that all this tech was pagan or black magic, or maybe they didn't understand how to use the new stuff in the first place, so they kept on using the old methods or the old tools. Either way, if people don't utilize their full potential, then it's kind of a waste of brain power for the awesome inventors and their creations. This is especially a waste if there is an empire or a government to run. You need work to be done by the civilians after all.
I mean, if we're not working more efficiently, how are the rich going to get richer?
Right. And if these inventions can and did definitely help us do more and become more efficient as people. So the point I'm making here isn't just my theory. The reason why the expos happened was to help common people understand new agricultural tools. There was a proto version of the official World's Fair Expo, which was held in France in 1844. In fact, it would be the 10th expo the French held of this sort, which then soon after sparked other countries to imitate, mainly England, like in direct response, because they were, superpowers that were next door neighbors in the region. So whatever France did, England had to do better, kept going back and forth.
What do I feel like at the French World Exhibition? It's like, haha, you say we must sprinkle the jelly beans on the ice cream, and then we fry it and cover it in sugar, and then we put more jelly beans.
Yeah, it must have been a pretty wacky time because everybody looked like a hipster and it was all steampunk.
Just like it is today.
But the most important part of these new series of fairs was to showcase a wide collection of new technologies from across the globe, not just one region. So really, it wasn't just a regular old carnival, it was a science fair on the grandest scales as well. Then after the event, organizers were tasked with dismantling or destroying the majority of the awesome stuff. As one might expect, this is an important part of the conspiracy talks we will address later. To get a better understanding of what the World's Fair meant to the world and its attendees, it's worth taking a short journey through its early incarnations leading up to Chicago in 1893. While we are not going to cover every single expo here, it's quick coverage of some of the important early ones.
So let's talk about that 1851 in London. What was that all about?
Right, it was called the Great Expo, like I said earlier. Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, collaborated with Henry Cole to plan the Great Expo. Its main feature was a giant iron and glass building that was called the Crystal Palace.
Another world, another time, in the age of wonder.
This expo featured many precious gems like the Koh-i-Noor, the largest diamond of the time, and the Daria-i-Noor, a very rare pink diamond. There was a proto-fax machine invented by one Frederick Bakewell. This was the first image telegraph and probably allowed one to send a dick pic to somebody. Good job, dude.
Why do I feel like the proto-fax machine was just some guy holding his ear up to like two cups connected by string, and the other guy's just like
some dial-up sounds.
I mean, I would totally believe, though, that one of the first test images was like either a butt or a dick.
Or boobies squished against glass.
You just hold the two boobies up to both cups, and then you wrap the string around somebody's neck and go like, wah, wah, wah. How you like your fax machine, buddy?
So there was some other innovations here. The first actual photo developing techniques made available to the public, called the daguerreotype, was made available, though it was soon made obsolete. The first pay-to-use toilets were used by over 800,000 attendees. A lot of poop.
Oh, man.
Barometers that used leeches. Interesting. There was also a yacht race known as the American Cup, and it's the oldest sporting event still in existence today, actually.
It was called the American Cup in London?
Yeah.
I think that's interesting because yachting is technically America's sport.
Dude, I was just gonna say that. It's so silly.
That's a really freaking old meme. If it was around here in 1851, like, wow.
And this Crystal Palace had tons of see-through walls, and the entire roof was made of glass. So this meant that the interior of this large building was very well lit. Uncommon for normal people to see at the time, because that kind of action was exclusive to palaces and stuff. Royalty, high class. This was the largest glass surface in the world. After the event, this Crystal Palace was moved to a different location where it stood until 1936, when it burned down.
Ow!
I have to ask, were the pay-to-use toilets glass as well?
Of course. And most people deemed to pay with the check.
It's written with brown ink, too. Yeah, how these things burned down is a good question. We're gonna say things burned down a lot this episode.
I blame the Germans.
Sounds like a conspiracy.
Kind of does.
Sounds like Burning Man.
So then we move on to 1853, Exhibition of the Industry of All Nations in New York. So they built another Crystal Palace, which was also destroyed by fire just 5 years later in 1858. This New York Expo also featured a 315-foot tall wooden observatory, and this also burned down in 1856.
Holy shit.
This expo, like many of the other ones, did not make any money. They tried to stop the bleeding and hired P.T. Barnum, the famous ringleader of the circuses in America, to try to get things in order and flip it around, but no dice. In fact, this expo amounted to over $300,000 in losses.
It's like $1 bajillion back then.
Yeah.
One of the most important inventions at the 1853 Expo in New York was an emergency elevator stopper, which would make tons of people lose the fear of getting in an elevator in the first place.
Oh.
Within 3 years, its inventor would install the first passenger elevator in a New York storefront.
And now you can get into the elevator without falling to your death. Look at...
And if you're looking at the show notes, there's a lot of interesting pictures of the architecture of, for example, the 1855 one that was in Paris, the Universal Exposition, however they might say it. Beautiful architecture, and it's all planned to be destroyed eventually.
This is where people go nuts. They're like, there is no way this is a temporary structure. People believe that these structures had existed for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, and that people just moved into them and started to use the interior of these structures, and then at some point they disappeared from the surface of the earth. But why?
Moving on to 1862, International Exhibition of Industry and Art in London. This expo featured a lot of iconic inventions of the era. Electric telegraphs, submarine cables, basically electric cables that can go underwater. The first plastics were made here, or at least on display for sale. There was cotton mills, which were still pretty innovative for the time. Some of the new inventions dealt with rubber and steel manufacturing processes, making the process of, creating them more efficient, and just became formula at that point. It got easier to make rubber and steel. There was an accident, and there's a lot of accidents that happen at these events. One of the members of parliament fell through a gap in the floorboards and messed up his leg. And apparently, he partied and limped around for the whole day and experienced the expo, but he died a few days later after gangrene set in.
Oops.
Well,
Yeah.
boys, it looks like we need a first aid tent next year.
The Dark Souls, you died sounds cues right there. After the buildings that were used in this expo were destroyed, they were reused for the construction of the Alexandria Palace in North London to be a counterpart to the Crystal Palace mentioned earlier in South London. So this reconstructed Alexandria Palace is still there in North London.
Oh.
Hasn't burned down.
I was going to say, let me guess, the stone building also burned down.
1876, International Exhibition of Arts, Manufactures and Products of the Soil and Mine. This happened in Philadelphia. This was to celebrate the United States' 100th birthday. The Declaration of Independence was signed in Philadelphia after all. Besides new inventions here, the Centennial Celebration Committee acquired or hired 500 soldiers and local men to keep the peace at this event. One of those soldiers was a man named Frank Geyer, who is most known for investigating the crimes of H.H. Holmes. These officers, though, they had to live on site of the expo grounds and camped in small units, which, unfortunately for 8 of them, sorta led to their deaths, mainly because of illnesses. Typhoid fever killed 6 and smallpox killed 1. The last guy had heart failure. So it's pretty brutal living at these times. And for this expo, they built over 200 buildings in 1876. The main one was 21.5 acres in size, making it the largest building in world history at the time. It took 18 months to complete and cost $1,580,000 to build.
Wow.
Of course, this building and 195 other buildings are gone now, with only 4 structures still existing to this day in Philadelphia.
This is also over $1 million in late 1800s. So I don't even know how much that would equate to in modern funds.
It's insane. It's truly, I don't understand why they would just destroy this stuff.
I feel like maybe the world would be a better place if we taught kids that you can change the world by partying. Instead, we're just like, and this war happened, and these people beat these people, and this war happened. It's like, dude, it's all about throwing parties. You don't just blow stuff up to advance the world. You gotta throw a big festival.
That's so One Piece to say, man. I'm gonna move on, though, because I'm a big nerd for that manga. But yeah, partying and having a good time leads to changing the world, definitely. And that's what these expos wanted to capitalize on, was like, hey, we know that's a fact. Let's give them the old razzle dazzle then. Show them what's up. How far can we go?
Yeah, and also it would drive innovation too, because the more people are get to see the new technology, it'll actually shift the paradigm faster.
Absolutely.
I mean, killing people is fun and everything, but wouldn't you rather rather like get drunk and make a bunch of money? I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I'm a visionary.
Right, so we're moving on to 1878 in Paris. Once again, Exposition Universelle. That's what they all are called in France, all of them in Paris. There was like 10 of them before the Chicago one, by the way. It's kind of crazy. But this was a massive expo, which saw 13 million attendees from across the world. Thomas Edison was one inventor present with megaphones and phonographs on display.
Yes, he blew people's minds at the 78 exposition.
And then at the 1889 exposition in Paris, this is a very famous expo. The Eiffel Tower was built for this very event, instantly becoming an icon. This expo attracted over 32 million people from across the planet and was the largest and most ambitious one yet. It was a celebration of the 100-year anniversary of the storming of the Bastille, the first spark of the French Revolution, which is pretty important, as we'll talk about stuff related to that later. But it was also used to help get France out of its economic troubles. Over 60,000 exhibits, with 25,000 of them being from outside of France, being featured. Of course, Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla were some of the most famous guests here. And it's here that the expo adopts this pretty messed up practice. The human zoo was not an expo-developed attraction. No, the human zoo became famous elsewhere, but it meant money. So at this fair, they had a N-word village with over 400 indigenous people featured. And it wasn't just one group of, races being featured in these horrible conditions. And some of the whack job scientists of the time would let you come and get your skull measured and tell you if you were a lesser-brained human, basically. Of course, putting white genetics at the top of this BS hierarchy. At this expo, and many after it, naked people of various races were put into cages or large enclosures made to act like a diorama for attendees to be, entertained.
Ah, yes, the time-honored practice of phrenology, where we measure the distance between your nostril and your brow to determine if you're going to be an opiate-addicted house burglar someday. I think they still do this on 4chan, right?
There's some things that actually do track, like apparently the eye things, like the way that your eyes look, that does have some correlation with psychological traits. But generally speaking, phrenology's been pretty much disproved.
I can believe that eyes carry a special quality of seeing the real person, because that's a magical technique.
But the whole idea is if you had golden ratios present and you had a beautiful face or whatever, they would think that you'd be a more upstanding, good person, like mentally stable person.
Which is one reason they never suspected H.H. Holmes of being a psychopathic escape room killer, like me.
You didn't kill them, did you?
Well, nobody knows about it yet. So this leads us right up in time to the 1893 World Columbian Exposition of Chicago.
Right, and for starters, 93 is a special number to Thelemites, but let's keep our hats on for now.
It's that many million miles to the sun, and the observable universe is that many, billion light years wide. It's kind of a fun number. It's an important number.
So this expo was named the World's Columbian Exposition to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus, quote unquote, discovering the New World, which we all know is dumb because there were people here already.
No, we got rid of them.
So why is this 1893 Chicago World's Fair so important?
Well, using our last episode as a launch pad to answer this question, the World's Fair, especially the 1893 Chicago one, was, despite its enormous scale, important because it birthed innumerable memes, which would come to define what it meant to be an American at the turn of the century. Of course, these were not called memes back then. It was, and still mostly is, referred to as branding, which each meme being proliferated as a different commercial brand. When we consider that it was during this time the American frontier was declared closed, the term branding, a term formerly reserved for marking cattle for ownership, has a certain poetic flavor. In a bigger sense, the World's Fair helped establish a national brand image and set the tone for how Americans would think of themselves, offering a focused vision of how the future was to look. As we will explore later, the Chicago's World Fair was so successful in doing this, in fact, it has led to some speculating that it never actually happened, or if it did, the story about it was used to obscure an entirely different version of the past, which has been hidden to maintain the illusion of the matrix we now find ourselves in. But putting conspiracy theories aside for a moment, nobody's really sure who first had the idea to hold the World's Fair of 1893, but it was probably due to envy over the French's World Fair just a few years prior. America, as a burgeoning nation, would be, the last big contender on the world stage to join in the frenzy of rapid colonialist expansion. And albeit a little late to the party, America was beginning to see itself as a world power worthy of admiration and respect. Thus, It was the call of pride which began to foment the designs to hold the World's Fair. Amidst the torrent of newfound patriotic sentiment, America wanted a way to flaunt itself on the world stage. As the buzz around a World's Fair grew, big American cities began to realize how big of a deal it would be for them to host it, and a bid for this honor would soon begin. In terms of U.S. cities, New York or Washington, D.C. seemed like an obvious choice. Chicago, however, they had different plans. Just 2 decades earlier, Chicago had suffered a catastrophic fire which nearly destroyed the entire city. Despite this, Chicagoans fought like hell to rebuild their city quickly, and in doing so, had fashioned themselves into the first modern metropolitan area. The population exploded, and opportunity flourished, especially for the meatpacking industry, which would, well, come to perfume the entire region in a stench of pig and cow shit, burnt hair, and rotting flesh. Fruit stands rotted in mass, human waste floated through the Illinois River, and the newly installed electric dynamos pumped clouds of smoggy soot into the air, which enveloped its evenings and winters in a thick, gas-lit haze. Meanwhile, New York relished in being the cultural capital of America, and loved to lord this feature over inglorious upstarts like Chicago. With its population nearing 1 million residents and the home of the first buildings dubbed as skyscrapers, Chicago was anxious to compete for national acclaim, and felt strongly that hosting a World's Fair would put it firmly on the map. To accomplish this, Mayor DeWitt C. Creer announced on June 29, 1889, a citizens' committee of 250 of its most prominent men, and passed a resolution whose closing passage read, "The men who have helped build Chicago want the fair, and having just and a well-sustained claim, they intend to have it." Nonetheless, it would be the U.S. Congress in Washington, D.C. who would have the final say.
Yeah, there was a lot of corporate world level involvement or interest in the planning process due to the fact that the first expo in the USA was a horrible financial failure. Like Luke just said, the final decision for location was ultimately up to Congress, and their verdict went to the highest bidder. Investor J.P. Morgan and his allies, I guess I'll call them for now, wanted the event to happen in New York. The investors that sided with Morgan were also some of the richest in the whole country, but as a twist of fate, they still lost it all to the Chicago group. In the last 24 hours to get the money promised to Congress, one Chicago banker named Lyman Gage raised several $1,000,000 to take all the marbles. Besides, New York City had too many obstacles and no room for improvement really, short of knocking down New York residents' homes, I guess. Common thing being that the expo should be destroyed after use, so a much more barren or naturally open area was preferred.
One important claim made by the Chicago organizers was that the area in and around Chicago, it looked more like the rest of the country. New York just wouldn't do. Back in Congress, however, it turned out to be a very close vote. At first, Chicago had a clear lead, but as St. Louis fell hopelessly behind, Chicagoans were incensed to learn that many of the St. Louis's initial supporters, they had now begun to give their votes to New York. In response to the news, amidst the concerned rabble on Chicago's streets, an Army Lieutenant Alexander Ross declared,
"Gentlemen, I am prepared to state that any person from St. Louis would rob a church."
Another person shouted,
Or poison their white dog!
Everyone bustled in agreement. Now, although Wikipedia claims to have debunked this myth, it is often said that it was precisely this sort of boastful gum flapping about the World's Fair which led the New York Sun's editor Charles Dana to dub Chicago the Windy City.
Like a bunch of airbags.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes.
Blowing air, they're just talking.
I thought it was because it was literally windy there.
That's what Wikipedia says, more or less.
Blowing hot air.
But it depends on your source. Some people say it was the gum flapping. Now, a German sociologist, Max Weber, likened the city to a living person with their, quote, skin removed, which spoke to the visceral, raw, meat-smelling vibe the city gave off at every bustling corner. Over 1,000 train cars would enter and exit the city each day, many of which were full of single women seeking, many, for the first time in history, real independence, and sought work as textile workers, stenographers, secretaries, and accountants. And while the city showed great promise, it was a remarkably dangerous place. At least 2 people a day were killed at these railroad crossings, many of which were at street level and accompanied by the sight of pedestrians walking off with severed heads and limbs in the wake of the most recent accident. Streetcars fell from drawbridges. Fires claimed a dozen lives a day. Horses bolted from their carts, trampling crowds of people, and diseases of every type slithered through its inhabitants. Furthermore, the police were ill-equipped to handle the average of 4 homicides a day in 1892. While many of these murders were prosaic, motivated by jealous lovers, bad business deals, or drunken rages, Chicago at the time was also host to America's first metropolitan serial killer, the infamous H.H. Holmes, who ran his own murder hotel motel with its second floor designed like an escape room to gas its inhabitants to death before stripping the bodies and selling their skeletons at a profit to various patrons of medical science.
What the hell? Yeah, that's insane.
No, a young single lady, oh, you stay in my hotel. That'll be $200. Thank you, lady. Now go up to the second floor. Here's your key. He goes up to his closet. He has like
Right.
all these little gas dials in there, and he like turns on the one for her room. He's like, oh, now I must run downstairs and watch the porthole. She dies suffocating to death. Oh, look at that. Oh, she's dead. Igor, let's us strip her skeleton and sell it to the closest university.
Yes, master.
Yeah, I heard that H.H. Holmes, in response to the World's Fair, like upgraded his capabilities to achieve these dreams, I guess, these missions he had in mind. So when the World Fair was happening, he was inviting people to come and stay at his motel because they, didn't have anywhere to go.
Oh, don't mind that gas hype.
And to build it, he did like the Donald Trump thing where he'd have like one crew of workers come in and be like, hey, you build this thing for me. And then they'd build it and he'd be like, oh, you built it wrong. You're fired. I'm not paying you. And then he'd like, call some other contractors and be like, hey, can you put a gas pipe in this thing? And they get like halfway through doing it. It's like, you're fired as well. And he got to build most of it at a huge discount because of this. And ironically, this is all the while the Chicago residents smugly imagined themselves immune to the grisly murders which had recently come to haunt the Whitechapel district of London, which we know today as the stomping grounds of the infamous Jack the Ripper killing. So like this time period corresponded to the birth of the serial killer. And isn't it interesting that it corresponds to how much pollution is in the air? Like in the 70s, we reached our peak in America and then we started doing unleaded fuel and the cities started getting cleaner. It's like if you mess up the air quality enough, some white person with blue eyes is just going to start killing women in his own murder hotel.
Okay.
I don't know why that is, but it's just what the numbers show.
Yeah, like Dahmer did some crazy shit. Eventually it's an echo of what Holmes was doing.
Yeah, Dahmer's like the soy boy equivalent. It's more like a murder apartment, a murder condo.
Yep.
Now, to accomplish the feat of building the, quote, white city from the guts of the Black City, as it was known, Chicago formed the World Columbian Exhibition Company to finance and build the fair, placing their hope and trust in the city's most prominent architects, Daniel Burnham and John Root. And these folks, they had created the Burnham and Root Architectural Company. And it was like, oh, you need a big skyscraper? Well, go talk to Burnham and Root. Well, Burnham was great at doing business. Root was the artist. And it was like every year they figured out some new thing, how to make the next skyscraper taller and taller. And it was like every project they did was like some new innovative first time they had ever done it, and they were essentially the ones that built Chicago's skyline.
Yeah, and they kind of wrote the book on how to build a skyscraper like formula. We built a one-story. They're fundamentalists in the modern architectural sense. So it makes sense that they were present and working on this exposition. It was the best we had at the time. So this exposition took place on a nearly 700-acre plot of land, which, to the agony of its architects, took months to settle on. After all, the setting had to be absolutely ideal. The designers imagined that this is what a city should look like and got to work, or I guess they hired people to get to work for them. But the whole idea was to draw upon the neoclassical era of architecture. It was intended to invoke a sense of timelessness, using this design for the almost 200 buildings. The material they used, called staff, was white in color, which contributed to the project getting its nickname, the White City. And L. Frank Baum, who wrote The Wizard of Oz, was an attendee and later stated that this White City was a direct inspiration for his fictional Emerald City.
Oh. Now, if you're paying close attention, we're going to talk a bit about the esoteric anatomy of some of the things included in the World's Fair. To begin, the Emerald City, in my opinion, may have been a bit of a reference perhaps to Lucifer's crown jewel, which was emerald, and the idea that this was a futuristic, Luciferian, man's accomplishment can do anything kind of city.
In addition to all that, canals, lagoons, and large fountains were built as well. These waters even had gondolas for attendees to float around in. It was all built in just 2 years, the story goes. And it was in this place called Jackson Park, a literal swamp. This was quite the statement to the world, and achieving this endeavor in Chicago was a bold statement, especially considering the city was nearly turned to complete ash in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, like Luke mentioned earlier. And this left over 100,000 people homeless, and over 17,000 structures were destroyed in that fire. So the city wanted to bounce back. Maybe it was all a plan by Burnham. I don't know.
Burnham! It's all in the name. Like those piggies on fire. Whee! I mean, if you really wanted to get conspiratorial with it, they tell you, oh, it was a cow that knocked over a candle. And then modern historians are like, it was a bunch of teenagers playing with cigarettes or matches or something. But regardless of what happened or why it happened, the fire allowed them to do a lot of rebuilding. And that's what actually allowed Chicago to become a major metropolitan area. Because they're like, if we could just do that again, new game plus, we're going to like design it a little better. And that's how it became so big, so fast.
So they got help from our guys at the Smithsonian because, you can count on them to keep track of history, right? Check out our episode on giants. But they got the Smithsonian to help plan for the Midway, the main attraction strip. And it was directly inspired by the 1889 Expo in Paris, the same one with the human zoos. This would prompt famous civil rights leaders of the time, like Frederick Douglass, to speak up on the matter. To add to this fire, they denied Africans a prominent amount of exposure in the expo. All these plans were still put into motion though, and the ambitious construction began. Calling on 46 nations to construct their own national pavilions, this was the first fair to do so.
It's a lot like how Burning Man does it.
You have a bunch of different camps, I guess, and they can build up however they want, like Minecraft, and then burn it down.
I mean, you have like the big man in the center, which is the central place around which everything orbits. And then if you extend out just a little bit from that, you have the regional pieces of art, which are big installations, but they come from different cities, right? And everyone shows up and builds their own thing, and then they all tear it down afterwards.
Many states of the U.S. also built their own pavilions as well. The California one had a bunch of oranges and like food sculptures, and they would hand all the food out at the end of the day. You could just take stuff, and there was, a bunch of states there. They rebuilt famous American houses and government buildings for their state capitals, to represent their state or, Southern style home. This was all on site there. You can see every American, so to speak, the essence of what it means to come from each of the independent states. And like we've been saying, this isn't an easy construction job at all. This fairground site was a giant swamp and meant that the ground was wet and not too stable, nowhere close enough to build anything on top of.
This reminds me of that Monty Python bit about building the castle in the swamp from Quest for the Holy Grail, where he's like, when I first came here, this was all swamp. Everyone said I was deaf to build a castle on a swamp. And he's basically saying like that the first castle, it sank into the swamp, and the second castle, it sank into the swamp, but the third castle stayed.
So this construction team had to, by hand, dig thousands of holes, then put thousands of logs into the ground to create a kind of giant pier or platform raised off wet soil. They had no power tools, mind you, or anything remotely close to what we use today. The electric drill that was invented in 1895, 2 years later, was very large, cumbersome, broke easy, etc. Didn't work right. So everything was done by hand. It was just thousands of men digging with shovels for days on end. This process was conducted over a nearly 700-acre site. While this was underway, planting of all the plants was to be done too. Green grass and trees to give the fair a feeling that it had always been there. And this is something that the conspiracy people are like, that grass and this tree there's no way they could have planted that it grew there. They did some amazing repotting jobs.
Well, let's talk about this for a minute. When we first got the idea for this episode, you sent out a video where a guy was talking about how he had studied this whole time period, but for some reason throughout all his studies, he'd never even heard of the World's Fair. And then the more he went digging into it, he began to feel like it just wasn't possible to build this thing in 2 years.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting, right? It's Howdy Mikowski on YouTube. He's also saying that he was in Europe. The way he got into this was he was looking at cathedrals and sacred sites and how the energy flows through sacred architecture to power things, to power people, and transcend the third dimension, I guess, in one way or another. These fairs, he's making the connections, trying to at least, to try to explain that there's a lot more energy at the astral or spiritual level going on than what people might realize. And we're going to go even deeper than what that guy's talking about in that video later.
Well, one thing he pointed out was like, how do you get all those construction workers? Like, they got to live somewhere, right?
It's true.
How do you get all of this stuff into a swamp, right? How do you move all this material in just 2 years and it all has to be done by hand? While he didn't come up with an answer about why it was faked or what the actual thing was, he just felt there was something immeasurably fishy going on. And it's this line of thought that leads the skeptics to believe that perhaps the World's Fair either didn't happen at all, or there's something even deeper than that going on. I think it's worth considering that, okay, let's say all of history we've been told is a lie, and this is just a convenient part of the lie. It's like, oh yeah, they introduced, alternating current here, and this is where we came up with the washing machine green and et cetera. But what if it's like Dark City, you know, and we're just like animals in an ET run zoo, right? And this is just the story they tell us when they want to upgrade our civilization to the next technological level, which sounds a bit crazy at first, but it, you know, to play devil's advocate, it does make a little bit of sense. Like they declared that the frontier was closed pretty much around the same time. And then all of a sudden you have this new thing called a serial killer. And oh, you have these brand names which are going to be household staples for the next 100, 150 years. Like all of a sudden these wealthy people come out, they spend all this money to try and tell us how society is going to be from this point forward.
Yeah, and you know, like we said in a past episode, but we didn't say it here, this is the one where the president of the United States pushed a button and everything lit up. And this was like nothing before. It was like Las Vegas, you know, for the first time. It didn't make any sense to the people then until this happened before their very eyes.
And it was like at the same time, it's like, oh, now we've tapped Niagara Falls and we're going to be sending electricity from the falls all the way to Buffalo and then New York. And then next thing you know, people have lights in their houses before they have toilets, you know? On a sociological level, these world fairs are like, oh, I'm gonna go buy a new graphics card for my computer. And they pull out the old one, and then they plop this one in there, and they're like, now look at the games you can play. Why don't you play these games? Look, we've got loot chests, etc., etc. And then it's like, that's technology until they decide to like do another one, right? They tell us like, this is how you're gonna live now. These are the products you're gonna buy. This is what it means to be a Frenchman or an American or whatever, you know? And it leads you to have maybe a little bit of paranoia about the past. Can we trust what we think we know about the past? Are we just living in one giant farm or one giant mall where, you know, the leaders, the politicians, the farmers, maybe, if we're going to take the ET route, come down from their ivory towers and then tell us what we ought to do and how we're to live and that this is the new future? And then instead of looking back and seeing like a slow increase in what it means to have progress, we just have these big like stair step jumps into our next phase, right?
Yeah, and that's what like modern conspiracy theorists will call, you know, a reset. And to fit it into the narrative of mud floods and Tartaria, if you don't know, Tartaria was a talked about kingdom somewhere like in Russia territories that was pretty well known, and then it got wiped off of maps for some reason, and there's no more history about it. There is even a CIA document that I'll share the link to in the notes that is like saying the Russians have a history of suppressing Tartarian history in their country to get rid of it. I don't know. You can take what you want with that. I don't know if that's even true because I don't trust the CIA all the time, but it says it in some of their documents, some wild shit. And it just means that maybe there is this, it doesn't mean that at all, but the conspiracy is like maybe there is this crazy method of flipping the paradigm, giving humanity technologies, especially the ones that were featured at these expos, completely changed the way that regular humans were living and probably started affecting our evolutionary cycle. Our behaviors change because we're doing different things. We're able to do more. We can imagine more and be even more American, I guess, is the attitude there. But it's talked about recently that it's going to happen again. This great reset is supposed to happen and like the paradigm's going to come and shift. It gets kind of scary if you want to think about it because of what that means. But these world fairs were amazing events, no matter how, you know, it was, you know, a reality. They did some amazing things. And it's reminds me of like some people who talk about the Great Pyramids and they were built by, you know, UFOs and shit. It's like, I don't know, man.
Right? Like it has a little bit of that. They're like, oh, nobody could build the city that quickly. It's like, well, maybe they did. You know what I mean? Like, they probably put it together with this staff stuff and they worked really hard and they didn't have workers' rights and they could just work you 12 hours a day. And if you just drop dead, well, move on over to the left. You know, somebody needs to work.
Is this what happens when masses of populations don't go to church anymore? They don't read their Bible?
I have a question.
Yes.
Are these world fairs still happening?
They are. There was one, the most recent one was in Dubai in 2021. Supposed to happen in 2020, but COVID was a thing.
What happened at that fair?
AI, and then at the end of it, it was like this World Economic Forum type, we need a one world government and one currency. AI needs to take control. Like literally, like AI is going to help us do that. Watch. That was what was on display in Dubai.
That's pretty spooky.
They had like a cybernetic AI that could guess the shape of your butthole and
AI might be the reset cause this time. Like once that becomes like a real thing, and oh man, jobs is going to change.
The aliens are like, oh, god damn it, they initiated the Terminator timeline again. Let's go back.
But if you'd like to hear more about the Chicago World's Columbian Exhibition and the occult symbolism that was used in its construction, specifically of the Statue of the Republic, all about Columbia, we're going to talk not just about that, but the Phrygian cap, which is included on various important American symbols and seals. We're going to talk a bit about Mithra, the Big Dipper, and even a little bit of Jesus Christ. If that sounds like something you'd like to know more about, then please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where your monthly donation of just $5 will not only help us keep the lights on, but you'll get all of our extended episodes, not just this one. I'll send you a 5x5 high quality vinyl sticker of our Big Bunny Baphomet cover art, and you'll get instantaneous access to our Discord server where you can tell us what crazy lunatics we are live anytime, day or night. Thank you, everybody. Eat carrots and shoot lasers.
Pew pew pew.